Today, I'm going to tell you a story about an Australian man. A man who worked on military planes, he raced in Formula 1, he won a world championship in Formula 1. He then built his own Formula 1 car and he raced in it and he won the championship again. He's inspired people such as Ron Dennis and Bruce McLaren, the one and only Bruce McLaren, the dudes who literally founded McLaren. So get ready to meet the legend, the son of a grocery store owner who went on to win 3 world championships. And that legend is Sir Jack Brabham. But before we get into it, I would like to welcome you to Forward Motorsports, your pit stop for all things motorsport related. Jack Brabham was born in 1926, that's like 96 years ago. He was born in Australia somewhere near Sydney. Now from a young age, he always had a knack for all things mechanical, and he learned to drive his dad's grocery truck before he was even legally allowed to drive it on the road. He would also help around with maintenance of the vehicles of the grocery shop. Now, the dude loved being hands-on, so he joined a technical institute where he studied practical engineering. But it wasn't really his cup of tea or whatever they drink in Australia. So at 15, he left school and he joined work at an engineering shop and then at a garage. Now, Jack Brabham wanted to learn to fly. He joined the Royal Australian Air Force on his 18th birthday, but there were already a load of pilots, so they decided to put his mechanical skills to use and they trained him to be a flight mechanic. On his 20th birthday, he was discharged from the Royal Australian Air Force with the rank of leading aircraft man. Now, his uncle happened to be in construction business and he was kind enough to set up a workshop for Jack after he came out of the Air Force. So how did this dude, who's now 20 years old and who's never raced a car before, get into F1? Here's the fun part. He was introduced to racing by an American friend who convinced him to watch a few speed car races, also known as midget cars. And as the name suggests, midget cars are like, tiny cars, but they have a sick power to weight ratio. These cars are normally 4-cylinder cars that weigh 400 kgs, but they make about 300 horsepower. For a 400 kg car, that is sick. His friend's name was Johnny, and Jack helped him to build these cars and race. But Johnny's wife soon asked him not to race because it was unsafe, so Jack started racing in the cars. The man won 4 consecutive championships in a car that he built himself, and pretty soon he wanted much more. He wanted to get into road racing. And soon, slowly, they've made their way into F1. Currently, we are used to seeing an era where drivers such as Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc have been racing since childhood. They've been karting since childhood. Even Lewis Hamilton has been karting since childhood. Max Verstappen got into Formula 1 at 17 or 18 years old. Here you have Jack Brabham, who at the age of 29 makes his Formula 1 debut at the 1955 British Grand Prix. He eventually had to retire his car because his clutch broke, but that was the start for Jack Brabham. Now, this Formula 1 era was dominated by big front-engined Italian and German roadsters, Ferrari and Mercedes. Brabham had convinced the Cooper team to place the engine at the back of the car for better handling, and he himself worked on the car and the chassis, and eventually it all paid off. He won successive world championships in 1959 and 1960. However, in 1961 his car wasn't really competitive and the other competitors were upping their game. So Jack left Cooper Racing. He then started his own racing company called Moto Racing Development in partnership with a talented Australian designer, Ron Tauranak. His cars were slow initially, but then they eventually gained perfection. And in 1966, there was a new F1 engine layout, 3-liter V8 engines. So this was the season that saw Brabham prove everybody wrong. He won multiple races, including the race at the Nürburgring, one of the scariest tracks, and he said that it was one of his best victories. That was the same year that he clinched the championship, aged 40. He continued to race after that, but he eventually retired from the sport at the age of 44 and he moved back to Australia. He passed away peacefully at his home in May 2014, aged 88. Throughout his career, he was known as Blackjack because of his slick black hair and his face stubble, but he also had a Kimi Raikkonen sort of vibe, and by that I mean where he didn't like the press and he refused to speak as much as the other drivers. He just liked being in the shadows and not talking that much. But there were also a ton of taunts about his age. Remember, I said that the driver started his first race in Formula 1 at the age of 29. At one point, he also wore a fake beard and entered the track with a walking stick just for laughs. He won that race, by the way. This man was relentless. He also learned to fly a plane and he got a plane license, and he would take his family and his team all around for races and stuff while piloting the plane himself. The fact that Jack Brabham won World Championship in a car that had his name on it makes him the only driver in Formula 1 history to do so. Can you imagine if Max Verstappen left Red Bull, started his own engineering company, came back, started racing, and won a world championship with a Max Verstappen powered car? It wouldn't be a small feat, and it isn't a small feat. And that is why Jack Brabham is a Formula 1 legend. Now, the story of this Formula 1 legend isn't exactly a fairy tale, it isn't exactly smooth sailing. He wanted to fly for the Air Force, but they asked him to be a mechanic. But the man never gave up. He won a world championship at 40. He also learned to fly a plane while being a Formula 1 driver. The story of Jack Brabham tells us that we should never give up on things that we are passionate about. So that, guys, was the legend of Sir Jack Brabham. If there are any other Formula 1 legends who you feel we should cover, let us know in the comments below. And as always, stay tuned to F1 Motorsports